Hello and welcome to the FY22 COC program competition bidders conference. Today is Monday, August 15th. My name is Paroma Nandi and I will be presenting this material from MOHS on behalf of the Baltimore City Continuum of Care. I'm just going to give folks another minute or two to join, but I will just move this over to the agenda so folks have a minute to see what we'll be discussing at today's webinar. And just another housekeeping piece, this webinar is being recorded and there will be an opportunity for Q&A, and I believe I'll be able to unmute folks, but if not, we can use the chat function to ensure that we can answer all questions. And again, I'm just going to pause just again to give folks a couple more minutes to join the meeting. All right, so I am assuming folks can hear me and see the presentation. If you cannot, please put something in the chat function. But today we're going to be going over the FY 2022 Notice of Funding Opportunity, an overview and timeline, a quick overview of what's new this year, some HUD policy priorities and some changes there, funding priorities and eligible projects, threshold requirements, match requirements, preparing the project budget, and then project applications. And we'll also be going over some details about transferring projects under AIRS and how to apply for newer expansion projects for those specific projects. So that will be at the end of this presentation, and just some application reminders. And as I mentioned, we will have a Q&A at the end of this session, and we should be able to unmute folks so that they can ask their questions, but feel free to use the Q&A section. Okay, great. It looks like the chat is not working for folks, but you can use the Q and A section of the Zoom to ask questions if necessary. And then I think we can, we'll get to that when we have the Q&A. All right. So again, some housekeeping for today. The webinar is being recorded, and all of these materials along with the slides and the recording will be posted either later today or early tomorrow morning on the MOHS website, along with all the materials for the local application. As of right now, all attendees are muted to prevent background noise. And as I mentioned, it looks like the chat function is not working for folks, but you can use the Q&A function here to ask questions. Only questions about the competition process and the application templates will be answered during this webinar. If you have a specific question about your specific project, please send that directly to hspapplications@baltimorecity.gov. So an overview of the timeline and the COC notice of funding. So for folks that are newer to this, the COC NOFO is just shorthand for the Department of Housing and Urban Development's annual national funding competition for homeless services. The full name is the HUD Continuum of Care Program Notice of Funding Opportunity. Through this competition, the Baltimore City Continuum of Care receives approximately $24 million each year in funding. The total amount fluctuates according to increase and decreases in fair market rents, and then any new projects or expansion projects that are either accepted or maybe not renewed. HUD requires communities to conduct a local competition to determine which projects will be included in the COC's application. That includes a project ranking list. So this is part of our local competition process. And this year, again, for folks that are new, this year it won't make it too big of a difference, but for folks that are renewing their application, this is a very condensed timeline. So FY22 competition, one of the big changes is that the timeline has been condensed based off the notice of funding application. So you'll see that there is some deadlines quickly approaching. So HUD released the Continuum of Care NOFO on August 1st. Baltimore City's COC released the local competition timeline and guidance, RFP, and then the project application templates on August 11th. You'll see that we are requesting that all renewal projects, that means that you have received funding in the FY21 competition, that you must submit your renewal application by this Friday, due at 5 p.m. The deadline for any new expanded projects or a YHDP renewal or replacement projects are due the following week on August 25th. So again, a really condensed local timeline, and I apologize for that, what that means for agencies, but unfortunately we must get the final application submitted to HUD by September 30th. So we have, again, a shortened timeline to get all of these steps completed. So again, August 19th deadline for renewal projects, August 25th for any new expansion projects or YHDP renewal or replacement projects. September 2nd, we'll be issuing out information about the reallocation notifications that our resource allocation committee will be reviewing. That will go out to all renewal projects, indicating whether your project is being selected to be rejected or reduced from the competition. And then you'll have any project that receives that notification has some time to request an appeal, which will get reviewed. The final project ranking will be sent to the COC by September 13th. So this will include all new and renewal projects, and that will be include a notification of acceptance or rejection for, to the project ranking. And then also at this, on the same date, we'll be posting the draft of the COC application for the COC's input and review. And then just following that, there'll be a public posting of the final COC consolidated application. And then the final submission to HUD will be on or before September 30th by 8 p.m., which is the deadline. So again, part of the notice of funding opportunity, there are three parts of this application. So the COC application, the project ranking, and then the individual project rank application. So the COC application really addresses the progress that our COC has made on ending homelessness. It includes who's at the table, the stakeholders involved, and what strategies, policies, and initiatives our COC is implementing. This consists of a large application that has a number of questions that MOHS in collaboration with the COC, complete those sections. The project ranking is how our COC aligns our projects with HUD priorities and how we use data-driven and objective processes for allocating those funds and how our COC has evaluated performance. So our COC's Resource Allocation Committee comes up with a ranking strategy that gets approved by the board annually. And again, that committee is very, it's a closed committee for non-providers that are not seeking individuals that aren't seeking any funding or receiving funding, and they work on developing that project ranking based on our COC's initiatives. And then the project applications are the local, is our local application process. So how will the requested projects operate, and do they meet the threshold requirements that HUD has set forth? So this year, our total available funding is around just over $28 million. So there is just over 24 million in an annual renewal demand. That's the base amount that the COC is eligible to apply for, and it includes our YHDP program funds. And then there are additional funds here that indicate our ability to maximize funds through bonus project funding, and then DV bonus project funding. And then to ensure that we have the support staffing that is necessary for our collaborative applicant and all of the COC activities that are required while operating COC projects, we have a planning grant that we'll also be applying for. So how are COC funds allocated? So again, as I mentioned earlier, the Resource Allocation Committee of the Continuum of Care Board oversees the development of the local notice of funding submission, which includes, developing an annual or multi-year funding strategy, reading and analyzing the annual notice of funding opportunity that's released by HUD, making sure that our local application is aligned with HUD's notice of funding, developing a communication plan for informing the COC so that there is full participation, and then approving the final submission of the annual COC application to HUD, and then overseeing the work of the collaborative applicant, which is MOHS, to prepare the NOFO submission. And then how are local funds allocated? The Mayor's Office of Homeless Services is the collaborative applicant. So MOHS is responsible for facilitating the local request for proposals to solicit new expansion and renewal projects. That's in line with the priorities and directives of the COC's Resource Allocation Committee, and then collecting and preparing data at the system level and project level for the RAC to determine any reallocations and how they'll score and rank all of the projects. And then also MOHS also supports the preparation and submitting 3 parts of the application that we just discussed. So again, the COC application, the project ranking, and the project applications in accordance to HUD and before the deadline. So what's new in this year's NOFO? So we already talked about the condensed timeline, which was a nice surprise for everybody. But again, outside of that, there are a couple additional things that are new. So there are some revised rating factors, and you'll notice that in the renewal application, there is a section for renewal agencies to answer some of these questions. And so there's a focus on how COCs evaluate racial disparities, to place a greater emphasis on racial equity, and whether COCs and homeless providers have identified barriers that lead to racial disparities, have taken steps to eliminate barriers to improve racial equity, and have implemented measures to evaluate the efficacy of those steps taken. And then there's also a focus on how COCs are addressing the LGBTQ plus population, so that we are placing a greater emphasis on how COCs are implementing and training their providers on the COC-wide anti-discrimination policies that ensure LGBTQ plus individuals and families receive support services, shelter, and housing free of discrimination. So again, you'll see those. There are some additional questions in the renewal application in regards to these factors. And again, HUD has included additional points on how communities are ensuring that they're addressing these areas. Additionally, there's a new section this year in FY21. There was a section on how our COC was responding to COVID-19, and today in the FY22 competition, there's a section on basically building on that. So how our community has built on those partnerships to prepare, to prevent, and respond to any future infectious disease outbreaks amongst people experiencing homelessness. So there's additional questions, again, related to what we responded to in FY21, but basically how we were building on that to ensure that our COC is prepared. Some other language that's been updated in this year's NOFO is some revised language on the Tier 2 scoring process, and then revised language and description of the point value distributions for the applications specific to the DV bonus projects. And then again, HUD has added additional rating factors that awards COCs that take steps to engage local leaders about increasing affordable housing supply. So those are, again, those areas new to this year's NOFO and things that we'll be focusing on as a community. Additionally, the HUD policy priorities have remained the same from previous years, but we do see additional policy priorities in this year's NOFO. So some things that haven't changed are ending homelessness for all, using a housing first approach, reducing unsheltered homelessness, improving system performance, partnering with housing, health, and service agencies, advancing race equity, engaging persons with lived experience of homelessness. And then the two new policy priorities this year were to improve assistance to the LGBTQ plus population and increase the supply of affordable housing. So moving on, funding priorities and eligible projects. So just a little bit about what is reallocation. So reallocation is a process used to shift funds in a whole or part from existing eligible renewal projects to create one or more new projects without just decreasing the annual renewal demand. So HUD will not award funds to a new project unless the project was created through reallocation, or the COC has demonstrated to HUD satisfaction that projects are evaluated and ranked based on a degree to which to improve this full COC system performance. Basically, HUD wants to see that before they give out any bonus funding, that we're using the current funding to our best of our ability and that we are evaluating our system and program performance, and that projects that are underperforming are being reallocated or reduced. So again, that there isn't waste in those federal dollars. Reallocation can only happen through the NOFO competition and cannot occur during the program operating year. And projects that either are requesting or receiving a partial reallocation, it's really important. They cannot reduce the number of units or households served. So if there is a partial reallocation happening, the number of folks that they're intended to serve cannot decrease. So it might be reducing their FMR to actual rent, or potentially if they're not using their full other line items such as HMIS or support services because it's unnecessary or they're just not using it, then those funds could be reduced there, but there couldn't be a partial reallocation to any rental assistance or leasing without reducing units. You can see our COC program portfolio over time. Again, it hasn't changed significantly. As you can see some increases over the last 4 years. Our largest portfolio project within our portfolio is our permanent supportive housing, which is in this lime green here. And then our rapid rehousing, which is in this light blue. And then you'll see that we have some funding in Safe Haven, HMIS, transitional housing, and supportive services. And then the dark blue up here is the planning funds that, and the planning doesn't change year to year. It's a 3% of the total annual renewal demand. And then the biggest change here really was from FY20 to FY21 with an increase in support services only projects, and that was due to our YHDP projects that were implemented, and we had 2 supportive services projects that support youth within YHDP that increased that part of our portfolio. So what goes into the ranking? HUD requires communities to rank projects into 2 tiers. So there's tier 1 and tier 2. The project ranking is reflected on HUD funding priorities, our local need, and then a data-driven process. So again, our resource allocation committee has a ranking and rating strategy that is outlined in the guidance documents that are posted on the website. But tier 1 projects can be considered as projects that are considerably relatively safe from any funding cuts. If a project does not meet HUD threshold review, it may not be funded, but and would move down from tier 1. But again, our COC does a review of the HUD threshold requirements before placing any projects in tier 1 or in tier 2. And then tier 2 projects are usually considered at risk of potentially not being funded. Tier 2 projects are scored by HUD according to the federal funding and policy priorities, and is based on our overall application score as well, on whether our tier 2 projects get continue to receive funding. So we've been pretty lucky in the past few years to ensure that our renewal projects that fall into tier 2 continue to get funding. And then even in the last year, we had a couple of new projects and 1 new project that actually received funding as well. So again, if you need more information about the tier system, I'm happy to provide that as well. So going into the eligible projects, there are a number of projects that you can apply for within the competition. Again, if you're applying for a renewal project, your project type will not change. And so you just, there's no reason to adjust anything in the project type. But if you're applying for a new project, this is just information on what type of projects you can apply for. So there's permanent supportive housing, which is rental assistance and support services combined together. They target chronically homeless individuals that have high disabilities and high vulnerability. You can see that renewals are allowed, and you can apply for this funding through reallocation or regular bonus funds. If you're applying as a new project, you do not have to indicate whether you're applying for for this project under reallocated money or bonus funds. That's something that our resource allocation committee will determine. And then it is not an eligible DV bonus project fund. Our second project here is rapid rehousing. So this is short or medium term rental assistance and support services up to 24 months. This is also considered a permanent housing option. It just limited support services and rental assistance. It's time limited. And then this is you can have a target population, but it is the preference to serve anyone eligible for that meets the eligibility requirements for housing under the COC programs to be eligible for rapid rehousing. And again, it's allowed under a renewal project. It can be you can use reallocation or regular bonus funds, and it's also eligible under DV bonus funds. And if you are applying for it under DV bonus funds, you want to specify that your agency is a DV specific agency that would be eligible for those funds in your project application. Oh, and this should say 2022 eligible projects. Sorry about that. There's transitional housing. We have one project under transitional housing. It's specific to youth. A renewal is allowed. We are not accepting any new projects under bonus funding or DV bonus. If you're interested in this renewal, we'll be talking about that in a little bit, end of this presentation, because there is a project that was formerly funded under AIRS that will be eligible to continue on, but we'll talk a little bit about if you are interested in applying for that, how you do that. There is another new component type, joint transitional housing, rapid rehousing. This is a new project type. We do not currently have this project type within our community, and in the past couple local competitions have allowed for this for folks to apply for new funding under this project type. Again, this is the use of both transitional housing that's coupled with rapid rehousing. There are some specific requirements of this project that are detailed again in the guidance, and you can we don't have any projects, so there's no renewal project really, but you can apply for it using reallocated funds or bonus funds, and also using DB funds. We have support services only projects. There are a couple projects currently that are support services only. They are only allowed for renewal at this time, and there are no support services projects that are open to other organizations. The only project that's eligible for either reallocated funds or regular bonus funds is for a support services for coordinated entry, which is it's only specific to the coordinated entry lead, which is MOHS. And then for HMIS, that's also eligible for renewal, and again, not accepting any new projects either under DV bonus or regular bonus. All right, threshold requirements. There are some specific threshold requirements that HUD has established. Again, this is specified in the guidance and in the RFP documentation. You should, as a new project and a renewal project, please review this carefully. You're required to make sure you submit all your supporting documentations with your applications. So again, review the checklist, make sure you have everything before you hit submit. So we require documentation that your organization is a nonprofit, 501c3 tax exempt organization, or another city government agency. You must be able to demonstrate the financial and management capacity and experience to carry out the proposed project. So again, if you're a new project, you'll want to specify in detail this in the application. If you're a renewal project, there are some requirements to submit your audit documentation and financial statements. You must also be serving folks that meet the definition of homelessness under 24 CFR 578.3. If you need more information about that, you can reach out to us. You must agree to participate in the local HMIS system. However, if you're a victim service provider, you may be able to use a comparable database. If you have questions about that, again, please follow up with us. Additional requirements. Again, these are all things that you're required to have in place to receive these federal dollars. So applicants must maintain an active SAM registration. You must have a valid DUNS number that's registered and active, be in good standing with the state of Maryland, and must be dated within 30 days of your application submission. So again, make sure that you have that completed with the with the state of Maryland. We request that you have the last 2 years of your single audit, or if you're required to have a single audit, or an independent financial audit that demonstrates the financial and management capacity of your organization. Commitment to operating a program under the Housing First model. We do have a signed certificate that you must complete, sign, and indicating that you'll be operating your project with a Housing First model. That's required for both renewal and new projects. You need documentation of at least 25% cash or in-kind match, and we'll go over that in a little bit. Organizations applying for DV funds must have a history of serving individuals, families, or youth fleeing domestic violence, dating violence, or human trafficking. And then if it's a new project, you must be able to show that it's reasonable cost and it's financially feasible. And now we'll go into a little bit about the match requirements. So match requirements are required for all projects. Match refers to actual cash or in-kind resources contributed to the grant. All costs paid for with matching funds must be for activities that are eligible under the COC program, even if the recipient is not receiving the COC program grant funds for that activity. So what does that mean? It means that there are a number of eligible activities that projects are eligible to spend funds on. You may not be getting specific funding under that line item through your COC grant, but that doesn't mean that you can't use match to support that line item. So again, if you have questions about that or need more specifics, again, you can email us, but all grant funds must be matched with an amount no less than 25% of the awarded grant amount. And that excludes any leasing budget line items. And it must be matched with either cash or in-kind resources. Recipients of COC awards must document match along with their monthly expenditure reports. Again, that's something that if you are a current awardee, a grantee of the COC funds, something that you would be working with your program compliance officer to ensure that you are submitting monthly match as required by the program. All costs under match funds must be activities that are eligible, again, under the COC program. I think we said this, that even if the recipient is not receiving COC program grant funds for that specific activity, and the cash match and in-kind match needs to be documented by a letter. So there are sample letters within the RFP and guidance documentation. You should copy and paste that, put those on letterhead. We really ask that you don't change too much of the language, but just adopt it as necessary to meet your program needs and meet the match needs. If you have in-kind contributions for any services, so that means any support services that you're providing, whether that's case management or any of the line items under support services, you must document that with an MOU with that third party. And again, there's a template within the guidance and RFP documentation. It's posted on the website that you can literally copy and paste and fill in. For the commitments for match for FY22 competition, again, for all renewal projects and new projects that must submit either by this Friday or next Friday, we will accept just the cash match letter. If you need more time for getting the MOU together, we will accept that. So just again, put the match on your letterhead with either the cash match or the in-kind match. If you need an MOU but do not have it by the deadline, still submit the letter, and we will work with you on getting the MOU ready in time for contracting. Again, if you wanted a little bit more information on calculating match, it's really just 25% of the total award. And this also includes the total administrative funding, even though that is split between the subrecipient and MOHS. If you are a project that's receiving leasing funding, you would just subtract the leasing before you multiplied that by 25% to come up with the total match amount. And again, there's some examples here that you could use to if you had questions about that. Again, eligible cost for match, you can use subpart D of the COC program interim rule to determine what those eligible costs are, but really it's anything that's eligible under the COC activities. So there's a number of things that you can match, and we've listed some of those here in detail. Okay, so preparing the project budgets. If you're a renewal project, your budget really should not change. You should use the FY22 grants inventory worksheet to ensure that the line items that you are getting renewed funding for align with that grants inventory worksheet. But if you're a new project and you're building your project budget, this is just kind of a checklist of how you should build your budget based off the project type that you're applying for. So really you want to focus on the first four, since subrecipients aren't eligible for this SSO coordinated entry project. So there's PSH that's site-based, PSH that's scattered site, rapid rehousing, and then the joint TH and rapid rehousing project. And you'll note that these are the activities which you can apply funding for under those project types. And then within those, in these component areas, there are a number of different activities you can apply for. So, you know, specifically when you're looking at support services or operations or HMIS. However, what we're really focused on is the total amount that you're applying for within each component type. And then for admin, MOHS, well, you can add your admin. It needs to be under 10%. Usually we see 7 to 10%. But if you, we will also automatically add this if you do not. Okay, so just going into the project applications, and just have a few more slides ahead of us before we get to the Q&A section. All right, so renewal projects, as I mentioned, the FY 2022 grant inventory worksheet is posted on the MOHS website. So in order to complete your project budget, which is your renewal project, you want to make sure that the total amount in each category matches the GIW exactly. Similarly, your project's application requested number and sizes of units match that GIW. Within each project budget, you can request your desired funding in each eligible line item. But just note that like we cannot adjust what's in the GIW without you know, a budget modification or amendment, which cannot be done at this time. So again, it should match exactly what is in the GIW. If you have questions about that, or if you're a renewal project in the process of an amendment or budget modification, again, follow up with us on exactly how to complete that. And then the other piece of the renewal application that's important is there's a couple new questions that we've added, again, related to those HUD policy priorities this year on racial equity and inclusiveness of the LGBTQ plus community. And then make sure that you submit all of your supporting documentation as listed in the RFP. Oops. If you're a renewal project requesting an expansion, you need to submit a renewal project, but you'll also need to submit an expansion project and a new project. And I know that sounds like a lot, but in reality, the expansion project just kind of tells us exactly what's being added to your total project. So it's not a huge document that you need to complete. And the new project is HUD requires that any expansion project also applies as a new project. And if that new project meets their threshold requirement and our COC score is high enough, that it will accept it and then consolidate it into that renewal project as an expansion project. But if it's not selected, your renewal project will still be safe and will continue to get funded. So it's important that you submit all three. Again, the deadlines are a little bit different. So renewal project must be submitted by Friday. If you're planning on submitting an expansion and new project, it would be great just to let us know ahead of time. But those are due again the following Friday on the 26th. Make sure you provide the supporting documentation. However, you don't need to provide 3 copies of the supporting documentation. Again, if you've provided everything in the renewal project application, we don't need all of those copies again for the new project or expansion project. However, for the new project, you'll want to, if you're increasing your funding, your match is going to change. And so you'll need, the only difference there will be you'll need to add an additional match letter to support the additional dollars that you're requesting. And again, new projects selected for inclusion in the COC's application. If they're awarded, HUD will work with MOHS staff to adjust the budgets and the service numbers according to the total amount of funding available for the project. So yeah, and then new project applications, and this goes for DV and non-DV. There is a template available. There are a number of questions that are specific to the project type. So if you're applying for permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, or the joint component, make sure you're answering the questions that is required of you. Develop your proposed budget according to the number of households you're proposing to serve and the staff and program resource needed to run that program successfully. Be detailed in each of your line items. For example, your staff costs, you should include the number of full-time employees and or the % of staff time spent on each project. If you're requesting rental assistance, or leasing, make sure you complete the chart in the application with the number of requested units to calculate the total rental assistance and use the fair market rent that's already been provided. So FY22's fair market rent has been updated in the RFP. So you would use that to calculate the total rental assistance or leasing that you're requiring. And then for new projects selected, again, HUD will work with MOH staff to adjust their budgets or service needs based on the funding available. And that could be like if there's a change in FMR once, the award notice is received. Okay, so lastly, Yhd Renewal and Replacement. So in 2019, our Continuum of Care received YHDB funding. FY21 was the first year that some of our projects applied for renewal or replacement. If you already applied for renewal or replacement last year, you will need to complete a regular renewal application. You do not want to complete a Yhd renewal or replacement. So your project is now considered part of our COC portfolio and you will apply just for a renewal application. We have one project that's still eligible to apply for YHDP renewal or replacement. We've already communicated that with the agency. If you are unsure, again, reach out to us and we can follow up with you. HUD is allowing, again, this year for a replacement application, and this also just provides some additional flexibilities within the project that allows, if awarded, allows for some non-COC program eligible housing and services that are specific to youth experiencing homelessness. The replacement application does not mean that you will exceed your annual renewal amount. And again, there's some specific questions if you're going for that replacement application. And again, there's one organization that's eligible for it, and we've already reached out to them. Again, this just goes into a little bit more detail about the special activities, but if you are again applying for that YHD replacement application, We just ask that you email us and let us know before August 19th so that we can support you in making sure we complete that according to the HUD regulations and on time. So I'm going to just pause really quickly. I'm just going to take a look at the Q&A, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about this heirs project transfer. All right, so there are 4 projects at this time that were formerly operated by heirs that are no longer being operated by heirs. So there is 3 PSH projects and 1 transitional housing project. So heirs Shelter Plus Care, which is a permanent supportive housing project, an adult case management PSH project, which is just the support services for the PSH project. And then there is a youth shelter, a permanent supportive housing project as well that has both rental assistance and support services. And then there's the transitional housing project, which is only offers support services where the leasing and housing agreement is through a separate contract. So MOHS has reached out to current subrecipients that are currently receiving COC funding to transfer the projects for the FY21 program year. So that's the current program year. And then we are looking for folks to reapply as either a new or expansion project for FY 2022. So again, these projects are all being transferred. If they're not already with MOHS as the recipient, they are being transferred to MOHS as the recipient. However, MOHS does not plan on operating these projects. We are again looking for a subrecipient to take over the operations to provide both the rental assistance and support services or as necessary. And so we've asked agencies to submit a letter of interest by this Wednesday, August 17th, and encourage folks that, you know, if you have questions, but you're still interested, to submit your letter of interest with those questions so we can review that holistically. And then again, we're gonna open this up to more questions, but I just wanted to bring this up that these are project areas that we are focused on. So in the request for proposals, you'll note that there is going to be priority given for PSH projects that are going to be supporting this transition. And then for the transitional housing project, again, that will be just a transfer of the project. It wouldn't be necessarily submitting a new or expansion project. However, we'll need details on, you know, if you are the subrecipient that is selected for that project, on how to move forward with the actual application. So again, just opening that up, I'm gonna just finish there's a couple more slides, and then we're gonna open it up to questions, and we can talk a little bit more in detail about this as folks have questions that come up. So again, make sure you carefully review all of the NOFO documents released by MOHS. So it's always important to actually read the notice of funding from HUD if you get a chance to read it. Again, there's a link here. If you're a new project or a renewal project, it doesn't hurt to look over the program interim rules. The MOHS website has the timeline and local competition process. The RFP, this bidders conference and FAQs will be posted. There are project application templates. Again, don't deviate from those. Use the project application templates if you're applying for funding. And then again, review your grants inventory worksheet for your renewal projects only. So again, if you're a new project, you don't need to worry about the grants inventory worksheet, but you can review it if it might help you get a better sense of what's in our portfolio of projects that are currently receiving funding. And then again, reminder, applications are submitted electronically. If you have questions, please submit those electronically after today's webinar. Deadline for renewal projects again is this Friday at 5 p.m. For all other projects, it's August 26th by 5 p.m. And then just so folks know, because we've gotten a couple questions about this, again, not to confuse anybody, but there is another notice of funding availability that HUD has released. It's called the Special NOFO for Unsheltered Homelessness. I just want to inform folks that Baltimore City COC intends to apply for funding for this. So the process is like our annual NOFO application. There's some differences, but you should be on the lookout for additional information released in coming weeks. All of those grant opportunities will be posted on the MOHS website and shared through the Journey Home. And if you're thinking about, if you've heard about it or thinking about applying for those funds, I would highly recommend reviewing some of the resources that HUD has released, and they're all located on HUD.gov. There's a webinar and a number of documents that can help you get prepared before our local information is released. So again, I'm gonna pause, mute the presentation, and then I'm gonna hopefully be able to unmute folks. I think there's a function to allow you to raise your hand. And if you can't do that, just let me know. But I'm gonna, yeah, it looks like folks can raise their hand. So I'm gonna unmute folks as they raise their hand to ask questions, and then we'll go from there. All right, Ted, I think I unmuted you. Can you ask your question?
Hi, thanks. I appreciate all the information. It's great how quickly you go through it, but they're very full. And so at Gedco Harford House, we're planning an expansion from 26 to 33 beds. I understand. So if we wanted to apply for increased funding for staffing for the increased number of residents, we have to submit all 3 applications. I understand that the new as well as the expansion and the renewal. In the new application, it asks how many beds or units you have. Do we put the projected total number, which might be 33, or do we just put 7 as the number of new beds that we're adding, but we want to add staff or mental health consultant salaries?
Great question. So yeah, if you are applying for an expansion project, the new project should just be the new new initiative. So that the additional, like the 10 additional beds and then the additional staffing that you'll have and whatever support services you're going to be providing, even if it's, that gets combined with your, renewal project. We want to just see the new project on its own.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, C. Kelly, I think you're unmuted.
Yeah, hi, Prom. It's Chris Kelly. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good. Listen, I think Rodney put in questions in the chat, but we were interested. We were going to be responding to the one of the AIRS projects, and we did have some very specific questions because we're trying to get a draft budget going. Is this the place and time to ask those questions? Like, for example, I'll just throw it. One of the questions out there is for the transitional housing program. We were really interested in seeing how it was currently structured. Is that something we should do offline or?
No, we can do that here. I'm just seeing if my colleagues are here to help answer some of these questions. Here, I'm gonna see if I can promote Bill to a panelist. Bill, can you answer that question? I think you're unmuted. Or you can unmute yourself.
Yes, okay. Can you hear me, Pro?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So Chris, can you go ahead and pose your questions and we'll see about answering them, or if it's going to require more detail, we can, provide a response to everyone after, in a written format after the presentation.
Sure. I'll attempt to sort of lay out what the questions were. The first one was, it looked like for the transitional program, it looks like that there was no money in there for housing. So I'm assuming that, but it looked like the participants were all housed, or I know there were only 2 participants in that particular program right now.
Correct. So there had been attrition without replacement in that program.
Yep.
The housing was provided through a project-based subsidy through the housing authority.
Okay.
And the building where it was operating was owned by the Y over on, oh shoot, not McCullough Street, but I'm blanking on which street, but over in West Baltimore. And so that provided the housing. And so really the funded part through the COC were all of the support services and essentially a 2-year program to get the program participants ready to live on their own, at which time they could transfer to a tenant-based voucher through the housing authority because they had been in a project-based voucher for those 2 years.
Okay, Bill. So that building and the housing vouchers, the intent is for those to remain as is?
We don't, I don't have a specific answer on that. I think we are interested in matching if there's some provider, an organization that wants to take on the case management and service delivery side, that we would then, broker some sort of arrangement with the Y and the housing authority to see if that would work out, if that was what they wanted to do. We're also open to other organizations that might have the housing existing that they would want to use for that side of the program.
Okay.
So it's not one or the other, but
Right.
Okay.
Yep, I got you. Yeah, that's very helpful. That's that does answer questions. And Bill, one other question: do you know if there were staff? Was it staff 24/7? It looked like there were scattered apartments in a central.
Yes, and I'm just noticing that FT put in that it's Druid Hill. Yeah, Druid Hill Avenue next to the Druid Hill Y.
Right.
So there's some There was some full-time staffing, but the case management seemed to be during regular hours.
Okay.
Again, I think it's going to depend on what the the conception of the program is from whoever's going to try and perform those functions again. All we have is what was on the application.
Right.
We don't have a lot of other good information.
Okay. All right. That's very, very helpful. All right. I think that's it for the questions for me as of right now. I appreciate it.
Not a problem at all. So Param, I don't know if you want me to respond to any of the other questions that you're answering in the Q&A. But I did also want to point everyone else to the fact that there's a question and answer feature. So there are some questions that are not being asked aloud, but are being answered nonetheless.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at Beth's question. I'm gonna unmute her. There's a question about like just a lot of unknowns regarding the heir's existing residence, and like what information can be shared at this time. And Beth, I think you're able to unmute yourself if you. If you wanted to talk, but I don't know, Bill, if you wanted, I know.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, it's just, we're trying to get a handle on what it is that's out there. You know, how many are third-party landlords? How many people are being served? Did they stay in the same ratio on their GIW, given the fact that in the permanent supportive housing program, for example, there's 121 people being served on 108 slots. You know, so just trying to get a handle of how many residents want to move, how many landlords don't want to participate in the program anymore. So there's lots of these unknowns out there that we're trying to get a handle on to put together a solid application in less than 10 days.
Completely understand, Beth, and I appreciate you thinking through and asking all those questions. Are those the ones that you've already forwarded?
Yes.
Okay. So I think we're going to try and answer those as completely as possible, just based on the data that we have out of HMIS or what we know from interacting with folks over the past couple months. So we'll be able to provide some demographics and some information about what the households are like, and to help you get a sense of what's there. Some of the other information that you're asking for, you know, these are all or were all intended to be third-party landlords. We know that some of the clients who are receiving case management services are in either 811 or project-based situations where they're receiving some case management under the COC grant, but have housing through other sources. We can try and describe that as well. In terms of who might be looking to be relocated, we know, and we're working on relocating some clients right now. But I would say that's more like a handful, between 5 and 10. There are others that we can guess from the non-response of the landlords, may be in a situation where they should move, where they may be in a bad situation with their landlords. And then we know from a lot of clients that we've talked to that they like where they live and they want to stay there. They just need that continuity of support services, or mostly rental assistance, to make sure that their relationship with their landlord is intact. Lastly, there's a huge range of, I guess, depth of case management that we're finding is required. There some folks who need a lot, and there's some folks who've been in this program for, over a decade and have very few day-to-day needs, and, may touch base quarterly and at an annual recertification, but are fairly self-sufficient. In terms of quantifying that in a really hard way, I'm not going to be able to do that just because the case files and other information that we've been able to get from heirs are incomplete.
So will there be any chance for a reserve to be set aside or some wiggle room as we go through all this?
Yeah.
If you apply to negotiate that as you go forward?
I would like to say yes. We're working with the HUD field office on this very closely. They certainly understand the difficulties involved, both from MOHS and the COC standpoint, but also from providers, and that we need some backstopping and some assurances as we move forward, because there's so much to unpack, and their goal, just as I think everyone's is to keep folks stably housed and in good shape. So I don't know what that would look like, but we're certainly advocating for that with HUD, and they have been amenable to trying to figure out what it would look like to make sure that folks land successfully.
That would be great, because I know that's what all of our,
I'm sure.
any of us looking to take over want to make sure we can adequately serve
Absolutely.
and support people, and not doing this blind is a bit of a challenge.
And I want to just say, for everyone who's interested in this, we absolutely understand that. We want to provide as much information as we can. We're really saddled by having a lot of very poor information, and that's I don't know. We want to work with you as much as possible. HUD's committed to helping this be successful. So just help us figure out how we can help you.
Not on the air side. Is tier 1 size large enough for all the renewals, or are you planning on reallocations because tier 1 isn't big enough?
So tier 1 is only 95% of our annual renewal demand. However, we are noting that the PSH projects under heirs are all going to be reallocated. So there's some details in the actual request for proposals on the anticipated amount that's going to be reallocated, just because of those projects. And then there may be some other reallocations. Our resource allocation committee is going to be meeting next week to go through that. But yeah, this is going to be unfortunately, it's going to be a really competitive grant year. And that's why I also wanted to, I mentioned that there will be another notice of funding opportunity through the unsheltered notice. And so if folks are interested in, applying for projects that might specifically better be geared for that, it's something to, keep in mind. But yeah, again, unfortunately, this is just going to be a competitive year. And so our community is going to do our best to, ensure that our projects can continue funding, and that, our application is strong. And we'll be reaching out to our larger continuum to support that full application process. And again, because there's limited time to get all of these steps done, that's why we've had to condense this process. But know that, our plan is to work with our subrecipients and our providers and our larger COC to make sure we get this done and do it well.
So, and I'm to understand that if we're gonna go after some of the heirs money, we have to have that all done by, at the heirs grant. We have to do that all by next Friday.
No, because it won't be considered. So although these projects are technically being renewed, it won't be considered a renewal project. It'll either be an expansion project or new project. So our hope is that if you're interested, you submit that letter of interest, and basically that letter of interest is just the threshold requirements. As you're completing your renewal application, these are things that you should already be able to check off your box. And then, submit that with any questions that you have. And then our MOHS will be working with providers to determine how best to move forward with that application. So again, we don't want to just leave this up in the air, but it is going to be kind of a work in progress, and something that we're going to have to do together to ensure that we apply for the funding correctly, to make sure that we're able to keep those keep the rental assistance and support services as needed. I hope that makes sense. So
Yeah, so
if
do
you're
your
if you're-
renewal, but we don't have to jump on an expansion if you submit the LOI.
No. And again, submit that by this Wednesday, and then our office will reach back out to you to work out the next steps for that application process.
One last question. I'm sorry to be asking so many. I am still trying to prime my final audit out of my auditors.
Mhm.
If your 21 audit isn't completed, what do you suggest?
Yeah, I answered your question in the chat, but yeah, just submit the last two that you have. And then if you have a letter that you can also submit with that indicating that your 2021 audit is in process, we can move forward with that.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to try to move to some other folks. I think their hands are up. Lori, are you able to unmute yourself?
I think, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. I just wanted to make sure, Paroma, because I think I must have missed this in the RFP or the guidelines. So for our YHDP projects, we're not submitting YHDP renewal applications. We're submitting regular renewal applications, which are due on Friday.
Yes, so you'll just submit a renewal application. The YHDP projects are listed on the grants inventory worksheet. Your St. Vincent de Paul has already applied for that replacement project. That's still, we're still waiting for some more guidance from HUD on what those special activities were granted. But you would just apply as a renewal project this year.
Okay, thanks, Paroma.
Sorry, I think I was on mute. Chris, do you have another question? I think your hand is still raised.
No, sorry, that was my fault.
Oh, no problem. And then it does look like some folks are having a hard time seeing the Q&A tab. We are answering those. But if you can see it, that's great. But if you can't, don't worry. I'm gonna download these and put these all on the FAQ. So you'll have the ability to see all these answered questions. And then just want to wait like 1 or 2 more minutes to see if there are any other questions that folks have. Again, here's Arlie. I think you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could, for the transitional age and transitional house
I'm sorry, we're having a hard time hearing you. There's a little bit of background. Can you try again?
I was just wondering if you could, for the AIRS project, the transitional aids, if you could speak to the grant term of that project?
Yes, hold on. I believe it's June 1st. But I need to double check that. But I will put that in the Q&A or the FAQ posting. Bill, I don't know if you know the date off the top of your head.
Unfortunately, off the top of my head, I do not.
And again, like for that project, we're looking for somebody to transfer. The project has already started. There are a couple people currently housed, but are expecting to exit. So this year would be a transition year for that. And then hopefully FY22, the following year, like, that project will be, more at full capacity. Hopefully that helps. And again, I can follow up with you on the date exactly.
And again, Paroma, do those referrals or participant come through coordinated access?
They should. I can't speak to what has been happening, but they are required to go through our coordinated access process.
Thank you.
And again, because of the short timeline, I do really recommend folks ask questions, and instead of emailing me or Bill directly, to email at HSP applications, just so we can track all the questions easier, and then we can upload them to an FAQ document that will be posted on the website and updated daily. We're going to do our best to answer questions regarding this notice of funding, and we'll be willing to work with you if if you're stuck on a piece of your application and need additional assistance. So again, note that it is still a competitive process, but we are here to help support you get your applications in on time. Yeah, and this recording will get posted to the MOHS website. Since we're almost at the end of the day today, it'll be up tomorrow, along with the slide deck. And if your question was not answered, again, please email us at HSP applications. There was a question about moving, and I think I lost it, moving activities from line items. So if you're applying for a renewal activity, your component should stay the same. So the amount for rental assistance, amount for leasing, support service, HMIS, that should stay the same as it's listed on the GIW. Now, whether you need to make some specific adjustments within that component area, you can do that, and you can do it in this application. It may not be reflected on the actual eSNAPS application that gets submitted, but we will forward that over to our program compliance team to see if a budget amendment or modification needs to happen, whether that needs to happen in the FY21 grant or in the future FY22 grant. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, with that, I think that's all the questions we've gotten so far. Thank you for participating. I know, again, this has been a quick turnaround, but really appreciate folks hopping on to the call today. And again, if you have questions, please do not wait until the last minute. Send them immediately to us so we can have the time to thoughtfully respond. Thank you again for all of your time today. Have a great Monday evening.